It's on. East Precinct. They're losing control. State police are trying to open the barricade. They're putting the pepper spray in the air. This, God damn it, they got me, you motherfuckers. I'm gonna eat this shit, though. There it is. There it is. It's a crash. It's a crash. I got pepper spray all over me. It's the tear gas. It's the fucking tear gas. Police, stop! Holy shit. Tear gas is everywhere.
Those sounds were from video taken by Omari Salisbury. And what it is proof positive that most of the media narrative about what is going on at these protests is a complete out-and-out lie. Okay, your family is still being lied to by the same people that's been lying to them for years, the mainstream media. There have been protests, and there have also been some rioting. But what's happening is everything's getting lumped into one. Protesters are getting conflated with looters and rioters. And if you've heard me before, and if you haven't, welcome. I don't care about condemning looters and rioters either, but even if you did, you need to understand that you're being manipulated. Because most of what's happening on those streets is protesting. It's people taking over the streets and demanding to be heard. Now, my argument, of course, is that rioting and looting are all parts of that process, of the process of protest when it has gone too long and people have tried to be peaceful for too long. It's a natural offshoot of what's going to be happening in terms of the total protest. But at any rate, what people are being told, what I keep hearing from people who still listen to mainstream news sources, is concern about the rioting and the looting, not concern for the protesters who are being absolutely brutalized by police forces all across this country. A lot of us, I think, believe that we're already deep into, the first part of this and this is going to be over soon. We're not even past the revelatory phase. We still haven't gotten everyone to agree on what we're talking about. Because in a lot of homes, they're still having two different discussions, right? And a lot of that is concern trolling, but some of it's genuine. Because there is a conversation to be had. Do we or do we not condone looting and or rioting? And do we believe in what the protesters are saying, what the peaceful protesters are saying? So-called peaceful protesters, because, again, I don't believe in differentiating peaceful protesters from other forms of protest, especially for something that has gone on this long without any redress. But anyway, there is a real conversation to be had, but there's two separate ones. And I feel like one of the best tricks that, we'll call it broadly, the right has going for it right now is that they're controlling the framing. And whether you like to admit it or not, your favorite mainstream news source is right-wing. It's inherently right-wing. Unless they are anti-war, unless they support in full volume wealth distribution, unless they are telling the truth about corporations and what corporations are doing to us at all times. It doesn't matter what they say about social issues. It doesn't matter what they think about who should be married or not. And obviously, yes, we want them to have the right opinions on social issues. But if they only have good opinions on social issues, but not on issues of war and peace and money, then they are still serving a different master than you and I. So this episode is going to primarily be about a thought that I had the other day. But I wanted to start with this, because one of the biggest things that we need to fight against in terms of fighting white supremacy and making sure that Black lives do matter is fighting lies. Because that's how we got to now. The fact that so much of our society is based on lies, is based on especially the lie of white supremacy and of Black inferiority. Anti-Blackness is a mythology, but it's a mythology that has been codified into science and has direct ramifications on our lives. Everything from medicine to jobs, everything is affected by the lie of anti-blackness and unlearning lies that we are taught repeatedly, such as that the People's Revolution that began in 2020 begun mostly with riots. Because I'll tell you what, even if every single day of this movement there has been rioting, there has been much more police violence against people who were doing nothing wrong. And that's indisputable. And they'll try and dispute you on it. Of course they will. But if you follow my Instagram at FocusedOnInfinity, I've been posting lots and lots of videos, as many as I can find and as much as I can deal with watching, of police beating the absolute stuffing out of people of all colors. And frankly, it's mostly white people that I've seen getting beat up, but beating the stuffing out of people all across this nation. Okay, all across Turtle Island. Shout out to my indigenous sibs. And that is what the discussion is about. That's what we're trying to talk about. That's the conversation we're really having. So if anyone tries to ask you, what about the rioting and the looting? You ask them, yes. What about the rioting that the cops are doing? Lobbing tear gas, which is, by the way, a war crime, at peaceful protesters. Now, we could be having an argument, again, the aforementioned conversation, we could be having this argument if they had thrown in tear gas to disperse people who were looting or were rioting. But that's not what's been happening. The people who have been getting the gas have been people who are just expressing themselves. They are just expressing their First Amendment rights. And what's more than that, they're not doing anything wrong. Let's not talk about law or the Constitution as a barometer for what is right. When the people all get together and decide to take to the streets and say, we need change, and we're not in a system of government where the people just govern themselves, then what their leaders need to do is hear them and do something about it. But what our leaders have done is do a bunch of performative bullshit while people on the streets get the gas. So let's talk about these lies, because they keep coming. Even while all this is happening, they are trying to stop this movement by lying to us like they always do, because that's all an abuser really has. That's all a gaslighter really has, is lies. It's the only thing they know, because that's the only way they can maintain their hold on you. Because the truth, as the saying goes, will set you free. But as the saying also goes, it'll set you free, but it'll make you mad as fuck first. And that's where we all need to get. And a lot of us are there. More of us than ever have been, and I am so grateful for that. But you know what? There's more people that we can get. Because the truth is all coming out. We're seeing it. And more of us are fighting for it. And I'm not the kind of person that's going to tell someone who's having the difficult conversations in their home that they're doing it wrong. I've heard some takes that the conversation that some kids are having with their parents is inherently white supremacy. And I'm not going to lie, it's kind of true. Certain conversations should not be able to be had, but you got to meet people where they are. And to everyone who is in their home, meeting their fucked up parents and aunts and uncles and grandparents where they are, and having those knockdown, drag out conversations, I see you, I appreciate you, and we need more of that. All the time and every day henceforth. Keep sharing it, please. And on the subject of family and of parents, the main lie I'm going to deal with is the lie of legacy. My theory is that one of the reasons that the runway is running out for patriarchy and white supremacy and capitalism is that the only thing any of those three have to offer you is legacy. Something to leave behind. Something to put your name on. And they can't offer you that anymore, can they? My name is Logan Grendel, and you have returned to the Focused on Infinity podcast. Let's talk about it. So what do patriarchy and capitalism and white supremacy and all that have to do with legacy? So those three things are what I consider to be the three heads of the Hydra that has basically taken control of the world, taken control of governments, taken control of mass mind. It's basically the three modes of thinking that have joined together to create the hellscape, essentially, that we live in right now. And even though America we thought was the best place to live, we actually are the belly of the beast, right? I've said before, England is like the parent of the US, but the kid took it far beyond where the parent ever did. The UK had a tremendous, tremendous empire, but now the US has an even bigger one, We've got bases in more places. And we have taken control either by money or by chicanery or through various means. We've taken control of so many different countries. There's so many countries that won't jump without asking us how high. We learned from our parents, but we did it better. So legacy. Here's the only thing that patriarchy has to offer. The name. That's it. You have to give up your life, whether you are male, female, or other. You have to give your life for patriarchy. The same thing is true of capitalism and white supremacy, by the way, but let's just start with patriarchy. Because everything's for the father. Everything's for the fatherland. You get your father's last name. That should be the only clue you really need. And yes, of course, there are examples where that's not the case. But by and large, in most places in the Western world, everything goes through the father, right? And so what does that mean? That means that if you are born male, well, you have a chance to pass on your name. And in a society where you are looked at based on what you have to leave behind and what you have accrued, and what you've accrued also, can be just what was given to you by your father, right? That's all part of it. Legacy works both ways, right? Either what you have to leave behind, or what you have been left behind already, right? Patriarchy demands everything, but if you're a male, then, well, okay, hey, at least I worked for 40 years of my life, 10 hours a day, doing grueling work. I have black lung. I can barely walk half a block without getting winded. But hey, I got a wife and I got kids and I got a house and I get to pass all that on. I have succeeded at patriarchy by being a patriarch, even in the small nuclear family unit, right? The nuclear family, by and large, I think is a mistake. And I think it is because of patriarchy that the nuclear family is the unit that is pushed so hard, rather than a more communal style of living, which is what all of our ancestors did, right? No matter where you're from, and I'm talking about ancestors, right? Like tribes. In tribes, everyone had a communal style of living. And yes, you did have a family, right? And you had bonds with the family, but the bonds with the family were not so much stronger than the bonds with the rest of the tribe. It was all about the tribe. It was all about the group, because what does it really matter when what you're trying to do is just all survive and thrive and live well? And that's a very important difference in the way that you think about things. Because when you're doing it all for the greater good, that's one thing. But in a patriarchal system, you're doing it for your own legacy. You're doing it for your father's lineage. And if you're a woman, then you just basically get bought and sold into one dude's lineage or another. And this isn't opinion. I mean, this is still law, right? In so many places, spousal rape, I say with air quotes, is not illegal. And it's because your wife belongs to you, right? That was part of the deal of patriarchy. So one of the reasons that I believe that the game is running out for patriarchy is that capitalism and greed and white supremacy have gone too far. Because now, even a white kid, a white boy from an air quotes again, good family, they go to college, they get out of college saddled with ridiculous debt, worse off than their parents were. They have no chance of owning a house unless their parents give them one or pass it along to them. And thank the gods, ideas about marriage and relationships and the ownership inherent in marriage are changing, as are gender roles in general, right? So this is why we have incels. And obviously, I'm not excusing anyone for being an incel, but you can explain it by looking at the society we have. When all you have to offer these young white men is the idea of legacy, right? You haven't taught them to be good and loving members of society. You haven't taught them to be for the greater good. You've taught them that the world is theirs and they're going to get a piece of it, a big piece of it, depending upon who their father is, right? And if you teach someone that, of course they're going to be mad when they find out that the world they thought they were going to get does not exist anymore. And yes, they're shitty people for not knowing better, but I feel like it helps to understand people even when they're completely wrong, right? There's a difference between an excuse and a reason. There can be a reason you lost your temper at someone, It doesn't excuse what you did necessarily because you lost your temper, but it is a reason. And a reason sometimes can be mitigating, though in the case of incels, it of course is not. Because the idea of thinking that you're owed anything from anyone else, sexually speaking, or that you're supposed to be allocated a waifu, a trad wife, at some point, just because you were born white. The idea is nonsensical on its face if you really think about it, right? And I don't think they have. But the thing that a lot of us who think incels are ridiculous don't realize is that when you're talking about a heteropatriarchal system, that's kind of the deal for everyone. Everyone, even if you're good people, right? You're thinking about this family unit that is centered around a dude and the dude's family legacy. And yes, the woman's legacy, if she's from again, lots of air quotes today, good family, right? There's something to that too. And now there is more of what I call imperial feminism, which says that, okay, women don't have to change their names, right? But whose name do they have? They have their father's name too. So it's just an expansion of patriarchy, just not only through the male child anymore, sometimes through the female child. And you'll pardon my use of gender essentialist language, but for these purposes, it's necessary. Everything goes back to the father in patriarchy, right? And that's why the Abrahamic religions also have hegemonic control over the world and go so well with patriarchy and with capitalism. And how does capitalism tie into all that? Well, capitalism is about the one person, individual. And who's the individual capitalist most often? Well, it's probably a white dude, especially in a world where up until very, very recently, you couldn't literally own anything unless you were a white dude. A little bit of a head start there. Violence goes hand in hand with protecting legacy. I'm going to repeat that. Violence goes hand in hand with the protection of legacy. Okay, because the notion of legacy is a notion of ownership. It's a notion of ownership over the future. And also it ends up being control of ownership of the past, because if you, like William Barr himself said recently, well, history is written by the winners. If that's not a case of saying the quiet part loud, I don't fucking know it is. It's galling that he said that out loud, but hey, at least he's being honest. At any rate, if all you've got to show for all the work you've done in your life is a house and a picket fence, you weren't ever allowed to be free or to really understand self-actualization. You weren't allowed to be fully yourself. You weren't allowed to be or feel just free and happy. You just had to work. You just had to put your head down and work on some terrible cockamamie job that you weren't interested in, that didn't necessarily serve any purpose. But hey, you did it. You did it for 25 years, 30 years, and you get to retire. And well, now that you have, the only thing you have left to do is to protect that legacy, and by any means necessary. So in America, what does that mean? You buy a house out somewhere because you don't want to live near a city, because you don't want that element running up in there trying to take your house, right? So you get some guns and you create your own little castle. You've recreated the monarchy somewhere in the Midwest, and you are the king. What you say goes, you and your gun and your God and your family. Great. You won at patriarchy. You won. Congratulations. Now let me tie this in to white supremacy for you. Not only is it the protection of legacy for you, it's the protection of who else gets to have a legacy. It's the protection of who else gets to enjoy the spoils, to enjoy the world as basically you've had it outlaid to you. Since this country was born on anti-blackness, right? Though the indigenous people got it worse and first, the game there was genocide because it was their homeland. It's always more difficult to fight someone on their own homeland, which is what the Europeans were doing when they got here. So they had the help of disease and, guns, germs, and steel, basically, as the book title goes. Violence. And when they came with the violence and discovered that they couldn't enslave the people who were there, but they needed a slave class, and they couldn't enslave the people who they had come with. So they found people who looked different than them and then started lying. These weren't people like us. These are totally different. These aren't real humans. They don't feel pain the same way. They aren't as intelligent. They look a little bit like humans, but they're not really humans, right? And those lies begat more violence. And not only was it violence, but it refined the definition of legacy. Who did the country belong to? Despite the fact that they were bringing over millions and millions of black folks who they had enslaved to do the work, the country was intended to belong to, right? This is all these different concepts in American thought, in history. Manifest destiny, the Monroe Doctrine, the whole idea from sea to shining sea, that whole thing. All that's about who gets to own the land. And it all goes back to that patriarchal notion of ownership. This is mine or that is mine. Who does this belong to? Can I put my name in it? Can I put my flag in it? And it goes back to what, in my mind, and I'm sure many will disagree with me, but I think there is an inherent selfishness to caring about your own family more than you do about the world at large. And yes, you are supposed to care deeply for the people who are nearest to you more. That's, I think, how everything should work, right? The people who are around you, you act locally with as much love and compassion and hard work as you can, and that makes things go better. If everyone does that, right? If everyone takes care of their local situation, then there are no local situations that need to be attended to. So everyone is stronger. It's one of the reasons that the black community, being historically weakened, intentionally weakened, not weaker, but weakened at every step and every stage, that makes the larger community weaker. If there are any holes in the boat, you're going to be losing water, right? Even if that hole in the boat isn't putting water in your cabin, the boat's still going down. For that reason, I feel that the notion of legacy and the notion of patriarchy in itself is inherently flawed to the point of needing to be torn up by the root. Maybe it served a purpose at some point, some of those notions of everything going to this one exalted figure, the pyramid idea, right? Everything is for the pinnacle. And that kind of shoots through our entire society, right? Even when you're talking about dogs, everyone has this concept of the alpha dog, as if there is in any dog pack a dog that is more important than the others, right? The first one to get to eat whatever, the first one, the top dog. We have even thrown our bullshit patriarchal thinking onto animals that are really most often just happy to lay in the sun and lick themselves every now and again. But no, there's got to be an alpha dog. Just to remind you, the studies that came up with the concept of alpha dog were performed on captive wolves, in a captive environment. So it was twice removed from actual dog behavior, right? One removal being that they are wolves and not dogs, and their behavior is different. And one being that they were captive rather than in any sort of natural environment. The way that I put it is that if you were to look at prison populations and determine that that's how humans act normally, right? Then you probably would come up with some similar ideologies, because people who are trapped like that don't act like humans normally act or how humans should act when they are happy and free and fulfilled, right? You'll find that prisons and that places like that crystallize into its meanest form, the worst of patriarchy. And of capitalism, too. Everything becomes about money. And of white supremacy, too. Everything's broken into racial groups. Why do we think that there is one best of anything? Think about that. Little thought experiment. Just think about what you think the best kind of car is. Is it a Ferrari? Is it a Mercedes? Is it a Lamborghini? Rolls-Royce, maybe? And all of us know what those car brands are, even if we will never own one or don't care to own one, but we know. And they're probably at the top of the list of cars we would name as the best cars. Why? Why do we even think about shit like that? All these different threads are getting pulled. White supremacy is the basal one. White supremacy and anti-blackness is the delta where all the sins of our culture combine. I had a very interesting conversation with a friend of mine about why we have to deal with racism before we can deal with anything else. And we do. We simply have to. Right? Because racism ties together, okay, capitalism. You can't talk about capitalism without talking about wealth, without talking about how we got that wealth and who has it and who doesn't. And you can't have that conversation without talking about the fact that people who look like me, well, guess what? Not only could we not get wealth, we were the wealth. We were the human capital stock. So you can't talk about money without talking about race. You can't talk about anything without talking about race. It all comes back to race because anti-blackness is the lie that created America. Without anti-blackness, if people had not been okay with enslaving humans, if people had just said, you know what, as human beings, we are done with slavery, which they kind of had in a way, right? But anti-blackness, well, shit. Hey, let's start this anti-blackness and we can fire this racism up and we can get this slavery on for another 300-400 years more. Milk this a little bit more. Let's milk it. And that's exactly what they did. Greater diversity in nature always leads to more strength. And with the family unit, this is a question I have, and actually maybe I'll start a poll on Instagram or on Patreon or something, but people who have been quarantining with friends, hasn't that been a much more fulfilling experience than it would have been if you'd been with your families? Right? People who have had to go back and live with their families, is that where you'd prefer to be, or would you rather be somewhere with like 6-7 people that you had chosen? And maybe some of you would choose your families. And if you would, you're very, very lucky people, because that's just a roll of the dice. Just a roll of the dice if you like your family or not, or you get along with them at least. But everywhere in nature, greater diversity leads to more strength. If you're playing an RPG game or a shooter game, any kind of game that you play with a team, right? If you choose all of the same discipline, right? Say it's a fantasy game, and all your players are magic users. Sure, you'll be extra strong at casting spells, but all you got to get is one rogue to sneak up on you and everyone gets killed. I mean, and to broaden that metaphor a little bit out of just the gaming world, right? If everyone has the same skill, you are critically deficient in way too many areas. Someone said to me recently, I got to be careful because I do too many things, and you don't want to fall into the jack of all trades, master of none thing. And I just kind of smiled to myself because the actual saying is, jack of all trades, master of none is oftentimes better than a master of one. Now, somehow people have just sucked out a negative meaning a lot of the time for jack of all trades, but it 100% is not, right? What it means is you have a broad understanding. Right? It means you can contend in pretty much every field. And it's better than just having one thing you're super good at, and if that thing's not present, you're useless. That's what the saying actually means. It means it's good to have a lot of knowledge. That most often, someone who's got a little bit of knowledge about a lot of things is going to be more useful than someone who is only a specialist. But anyway, greater diversity always leads to more strength. And that's basic evolutionary theory as well. Right? Stay out of your own gene pool. Stay as far the fuck away from your own gene pool as you can. But guess what? That's a lie that came with white supremacy and patriarchy. Because when you get to decide who gets to have the legacy, and you've thrown in the mix, okay, well, these people are property, they're not humans, and these people are the good people, you have effectively eliminated science. It's an anti-science stance. Racism is inherently an anti-science stance. And we wonder why we have climate deniers. It goes together very well. Let's ask these racists. Ask a racist what they think. Really ask them. Do you actually think that black people are less intelligent? That they can take more pain? That we are inherently more criminal? It's just in our DNA to be criminals? Because I bet a lot of them low-key think that, and some of them not even low-key. Like even the well-meaning all lives matter type racists, right? I think a lot of that is just because they haven't examined the fact that they genuinely do think that black people are different than white people, right? Or that people in general are different, that race is actually something that matters. And I want to say a quick note on this. Yes, we do want to have a world where race is no longer a thing, where it's just like, something about yourself that's interesting just because it's about you, Oh, cool. Your mother was from Cameroon and your father was from India. Okay, cool. But that's it, right? There's no connotation to it. There's no caste system. There's no anti-blackness, right? But it wouldn't be a world where you didn't see color. It would be a world where you saw color, but that color didn't matter. And that is the world that we are going towards. But we ain't fucking there yet. We are nowhere near there. We're just nowhere near there. And so there is a lot of spiritual bypassing in the spiritual community. People who I have spoken to and enjoyed speaking with about magic, about tarot, about astrology, things like that. And they are tomb silent right now when it comes to Black Lives Matter. A lot of them think that's like, I don't want to spread the negativity, and talking about that self just spreads negativity. You want to know what spreads negativity? Watching somebody die and not doing anything. How about that for spreading negativity? How about that? Okay. All magic that is worth anything, all religion that is worth anything, is based on an understanding of the world in which you live. And I gotta say this, I wanted to save this for its own episode or something, but I gotta just say this now. Black people, while our white sibs are trying to fight for us, and I hope they're using their wallets and their time and their social media, and they're on the streets doing it, yes, we also have work to do in our families, because a lot of our families are colonized as fuck. Okay? And even the most woke families are often very Christian. And there's no way to say this other than plainly. If you're Black and you're Christian, you've been colonized. There's no way around it. Okay? We can't have these difficult conversations about people getting rid of white supremacy and about white people fighting white supremacy, and we don't fight white supremacy in our own homes. Because Christianity, the fucking King James Bible, okay? This was given to us by slavers. So you can keep your slave God if you want to, but then don't expect somebody to fight white supremacy in their own home when you won't fight it in your own home. Because what we need to do is we need to decolonize our neighborhoods. And what I mean by that is taking a lot of the power away from these churches that don't do a goddamn thing for Black people. The idea of tithing, the idea of a community place where people get together to worship, to fellowship, and everyone gives 10% of their money and something is done for the community, right? I love that idea, but that's not what the fuck happens, is it? You give your tithes, right? I used to give tithes when I was a kid. Okay, out of the little money that I made, I gave 10% to the church because that's what you're supposed to do. But what did we see from that? Right? And let me not completely diss the church that I went to when I was a kid. They did do a lot of good things for the community, but congregations are supposed to be smaller and more local so that they can actually help. Like a church, one of the reasons that you have a church, right? Those were built of stone. They were solid buildings. As a measure of last resort, everyone could get together there, right? In some sort of time of extreme trouble. It was literally a sanctuary, literally a safe place, right? And all those funds you could use to store up food and have stuff for the community, right? That's the idea of the church. But that's not the way that it's worked for a very long time. The church, as an instrument of patriarchy and of capitalism, has been there to extract money from people who give it over to the father, the air quotes father. Just like we all give taxes, time, money, our general thought over to Uncle Sam, to the idea that the USA, the flag, that's our legacy. Even those of us that don't own a fucking piece of it, right? Rally around the flag. Black people, you got to decolonize your house and your brain. And I know that it is psychologically uncomfortable, but if you are a Christian, you have been colonized. Did nobody get Christianity, especially nobody Black, without it being beaten into them? And not just Black people either. Okay? Many of the people with whom I practice magic come from various European traditions that were before Christianity. And y'all got your asses beat too by Christians. Subjugated. Your legacy co-opted and rolled into that of the Christianity that was just rolling its way across the world. Let's just let that marinate for a bit, and I'm going to come back sooner than later, because I got a lot more to say about this topic. But for now, thank you for listening to this episode. Please do follow me on Instagram at FocusedOnInfinity, on Twitter at WatcherInfinite, and also please join my Patreon. That's patreon.com/FocusedOnInfinity, where you'll get a little sampling of everything that I do. There's art, there's music, there's garden tips, there's tips on dogs, in addition to the podcast, which, as I've said, the main body of which will always be free, because information should be free and ideas should be shared freely. Much love to everyone. Hope you are still staying safe and masked up, because regardless of what anyone tries to tell you, we are about to have more spikes, and this is going to be going on all year long, if not more. Okay? So keep yourself safe. Grendel out.